Now let's take a look at the for loop, and this is a very basic looping structure that you're going to use a couple of 100 billion times in your coding through the years. But the for loop allows us to repeat statements continuously. Now this is really, again, what we wanted computers for. That's what computers do best. They perform repetitive statements very quickly, and then they can branch based on certain conditions. Now the for loop specifically is going to be used when we want to repeat a set of statements or a set of commands a specified number of times. Now when do we want to use this? Well, we want to use a for loop, and you'll start to just think this way. If you're looking at this for the first time, the temptation is to take notes and try to memorize which one do I need. Trust me, when you're writing your code, it will become very apparent which one you need as you're trying to think through the process of what you're trying to achieve. But when you know the number of repetitions you need to do, I need to loop through this 20 times. Well, you can use a for loop for that. Now, you can also supply the number of repetitions by either user input or program conditions. And here's the rough syntax for this. It's not rough, but I don't like some of the terminologies that are used, so I'll correct those. We're going to start off with the for command, and then in parentheses we're going to put three things. Number one is the start expression, okay? And in our example we're going to say a equals 1. So this is where our counter starts at. Then the test expression, and this in our example would be like a is less than or equal to 20 or 10 or something like that. So this is where it starts. This is what we're always testing for. So we're looking for true or false here. And then count expression is where we are adding 1 or 2 or whatever to this. All right, this is where we're incrementing, and this is where we're actually counting how many times we're going through the loop. And every time we get past this successfully, or we get a true right here, we're going to add 1 to it, and then we're going to jump into our code. Now anything between these two braces here is going to be obviously a block of code, and this is going to repeat as many times as we go through this. All right, so let's jump out now to Visual Studio and just see what this looks like. All right, now I've created a very simple solution that you will see in your work files folder. It is the for loop example, and then my source file that I'm writing in my module is floop.cpp. all right, well, we just want to create a little for loop here, and we want to loop through 20 times. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is create an integer that we can use, and I'll just create the integer, and now I am going to say for, then I'll put my parentheses, and I will say a equals 1, and so we're going to start with that. And then we're going to say as long as a is less than or equal to 20. All right, let me back up here and correct something. So for as long as a is less than or equal to 20, then we want to keep going through the loop, and we just want to add 1 to a every time through. Okay, so there's the beginning of our for loop, and now we will put our braces for the code that we want to run. Now what code do we want to run? Well, let's just do a standard namespace console out command, and let's just output our variable a, and we will watch it increment every time we go through the loop. Okay, and then we'll put an inline out here. Now this is very straightforward. Okay, no big surprises here unless I fat fingered something. So we will build that. We'll watch over here on the output and see what happens. So now we've built it, and let's go out to our actual program and run it. And so I will jump out into Visual Studio 2010 projects. There's my for loop example. Again, my executables in the debug folder. I'll hold down shift, right click, open command window here. And notice if I do a directory, you will see there's for loop example exe. So I'm going to clear that and do for loop example and run it. Notice we looped through 20 times. Okay, now that's pretty straightforward. We looped through 20 times, no big surprises, right? But let me show you one thing that you need to be aware of. All right, and what I'm going to do here is copy my C out and put it right down here and point out that after the loop ends, A's value is, and let's take a look at this, because this can surprise you the first time that you see this, because I want you to think what's happening. We're checking to see if A is less than 20, and if it is, then we're adding 1 to it and we're going through, okay? Which means that after this looping ends, A is actually worth 1 larger than what satisfied this condition right here, okay? So even though we're looping through, and I'll show you this, we're looping through up to 20 times, A, when we're done, is actually going to be worth 21, all right? And the reason I'm telling you this is if you ever try to reuse that calendar somewhere else or load it into something, it can definitely surprise you if you haven't thought this through. So notice we looped through 20 times, but after the loop ends, A's value is 21, because what happened there is once it saw that A was 21, it was no longer less than or equal to A, we broke out of the loop and didn't run. Okay, so anyway, don't let that surprise you, but that's a very simple for loop example. Now you will use that quite a bit, and you can put as many lines of code as you need to between these braces here and do some very, very cool stuff with your code. Next up on the agenda is the do loop. Now in this video I want to show you the basics on the do loop and show you a quick little example, very simple example. But the first thing I want you to understand is when somebody talks about the do loop, they also may use the words the do while loop, and so you'll hear it both ways. They mean basically the same thing. Now this is going to do just what the for loop did. It is going to repeat statements continuously as long as the condition that you specify is still true. Now the thing that's really unique about the do or the do while loop is it always executes the statements in the loop at least 1 time, and then it checks a condition after it's executed the statement to see if it needs to continue executing it. So when do you want to use a do loop? Again, the real world, just as you're writing your code, you'll understand when you need to use it based on what you're trying to do. But whenever your statement should execute at least once, and then that execution should continue until whatever condition you've set up is satisfied. So let's look at the syntax of the do loop here. We'll start off with the keyword do, then we'll jump to the next line and put our braces in, and inside the braces we will put whatever magic programming statements that we want to have run continuously. Then at the end of the brackets, right outside the bottom closing bracket, we will put the keyword while, and then in parentheses we will put whatever condition we want to check for. Now it's implied here that as long as this particular condition equates to true, we will jump back up to the braces and we will run through our statements again. We'll come down and we'll check our condition again. But understand the program flow here. The first time we come across this in our code, we see the do, we jump in here, we execute these statements, then we check the condition, and if it's true, we're going to jump right back up, come through, work the statements again, come down and check it. If it's false, we simply break out, go down to the next line, and continue on with our code. All right, so let's go out and do a quick little demo and take a look at what this thing actually looks like in action. All right, now I'm in Visual C++ 2010 Express, and I've created a very simple little do loop example project. You will see this in your work files folder, something very close to this anyway. And I created a do loop CPP file, module to write my C++ code in. And so now the first thing I'll do is create an integer to handle my counting functions, and I'll just initialize that to 0, an integer a. And now we'll write our do loop, and so we'll say do, jump down to the next line, and let's go ahead and put our brackets in. And inside the brackets, I will just write my standard cout or console out command, and we are going to just put the value of a out here. And then we will increment a here, and then we will say while a is less than 25. And notice we put a semicolon at the end, and just like that we're ready to go if I put a semicolon there. And I don't know if you can see the little red deal there, but a little red squiggly under that. But it was telling me, hey, wait a minute, dude, let me put it back. I don't know if you can see that red right there. but I didn't have my semicolon here. All right, so pretty straightforward. Let's compile this, the do loop example. We'll watch it run here. We should see a flash over here. There it is. So it looks like we did successfully build it. Let's go out into Documents, Visual Studio 2010, Projects, the do loop example. I will hold down Shift, right click on Debug, open command window here, and we will type do loop example. Notice we did our count from 0 to 24. Let's talk about how we got there. The first time through, A was equal to 0, so it ran the first time. Then we added 1 to it, checked it, A was still less than 25, so we went again. And notice the last time it reported was 24 because it was less than 25. This is going to be the same condition as a for loop, and that is, let me just copy this out command here and put a little note out here. After the loop ends, A's value is, and we will see what A's value actually is after the loop ends. And again, you're going to find that it's one more than the last thing that was reported inside the loop. Okay, so let's do loop example, and you'll notice we went, well, here's our run here. We went from 0 down to 24, and after the loop ends, A's value is 25. So keep that in mind if you ever try to use that after the loop is done. But that is a very simple example on how to use a do or a do while loop. The while loop is a very close cousin to the do loop, and you'll see why in just a few minutes. And with the while loop, we're going to do what we do with any loop, the for loop, the do loop. We're going to repeat statements continuously as long as a certain condition is true. And that certain condition obviously is one that we create and we code. Now the statements never execute unless the condition is true, but then they will continue to execute as long as the condition is true. Now there's the big difference between the while loop and a do loop. With a do loop, the statements are always going to execute at least once, and with the while loop, the statement is only going to execute when that certain condition exists in a true state, and then it will continue to execute until the condition is met. Now, a while loop's also good when the number of times you want to execute your statements is either not known or it could change in the course of the program running. All right. So let's jump out into Visual Studio and take a look at a while loop. Now, this is a project that I've built for the while loop example. Notice I named it aptly while loop example. This will be in your work files folder, by the way. Then I created a source file, whileloop.cpp. All right, standard programming structure on all of the examples here that we've been using. And so let's just jump in here and start to code this up. All right, first thing I'll do, create an integer for my counter. I will initialize this to a value of 0, and then notice the structure of a while loop. All right, very similar to a do loop, except we just simply replace the word do with while, and then everything else is syntactically the same. We're going to then put our command in here, and we're going to use our standard cout, and we'll put the value of A, and then once we have run that, we will increment A, and just like that we're done. Now notice the syntax here. While A is less than 25, then run this. All right, and then once you have run it, we're going to automatically increment this. Now what's really interesting is we could have this run, and there could be something else going that's affecting the value of A, something in our code here. So we may be going out, connecting into a database, getting a count of something, loading it back into a variable, and then checking that variable. But for here I'm kind of cheating, and I'm just incrementing it automatically as we run through it. So let's compile this and then go run it and see what we get see if we get what we expected. That's always good from a program. And so I will once again jump out into Documents, Visual Studio 2010 Projects, and this is the while loop example. I'll hold down the Shift key, right click on Debug, and choose Open Command Window here. Do a quick dir to make sure I'm in the right place, and there's my while loop example. So I'm going to clear that and type while loop example, and I could put exe on there if I wanted to, but I don't need to. Notice it counts from 0 to 24, and let's talk about why and what's going on. Well, first time up, a equals 0, it is less than 25, and so it just simply outputs, and then it adds 1 to it. It goes back, it's still less than 25 because it's now 1, and it just continues to loop through. Alright, now notice something here. If I set a equal to 26 and recompile this, now this simply will not run because a is greater than 26. It's not less than 25 anymore, and we're not going to have anything happen here. Alright, and actually I am going to put a little cout down here so that you can see. We'll just say loop completed. Alright, let me compile that again to make sure that I get this in there. And let's go back out here, and I will type CLS to clear it. Then I'll use my up arrow key and go through my commands. Notice all we got was loop completed. Alright, well, let's go back and change this, and let's make a 22. Alright, recompile, and you'll see that it will run a few times and then it will finally complete. Alright, and so I will jump back out here again, and notice we started at 22, it went to 24, and then the loop completed. So anyway, I like these simple examples. This is the way to learn how to program in whatever language you're working in. Work through this, go change conditions, change the positions of things, and make sure that it makes sense to you in your brain, because this right here is going to get exponentially more complex when you start using this in real code, right? But as long as you can understand what's happening syntactically and in the background and memory and all that, and the functionality of these while loops and do loops and for loops, this is going to greatly help you when you start to look at these things in somebody else's code especially, but even when you start to write them in your own. Okay, so anyway, that is an example of the while loop.